if this division has been a mainstay, this team has not been, but over the last couple of years, they have proven to be one of the best, most consistent, most reliable teams in the NFL, and that is the Cincinnati Bengals. The story around the Bengals, the conversation around the Bengals a little bit reminds me of what we discussed with the Niners when we did an NFC West preview, where typically the way that your season ended is kind of an indictment of the roster that you have and the weaknesses that it might possess. The Bengals lost the AFC Championship game in part because they lost half their starting offensive line before the AFC Championship game began. They looked like the Bengals team from 2020, where you had multiple starters along that line that you really couldn't rely on in that spot because they had injuries. I mean, that's what happened down the stretch. And so this team, top to bottom, is incredibly complete. In 2021, the Bengals went to the Super Bowl with a flawed group that I think was fortunate to get as far as it did. In 2022, I think this was arguably the best team in football in the second half of the season, and they were unfortunate to not get back to the Super Bowl. And I think that's kind of where, in my mind, the Bengals sit right now.
Yeah, I think that's what has been so fun with this kind of, since Joe Burrow's had a full season, basically, I'll start with that, is going from that first season where they were a nice surprise, felt a little lucky, felt a little bit the underlying metrics that we've talked about, but just even their play style felt like the bounces went their way, opposing teams, missing field goals. I remember the Vikings game, I think in week 1 of that year, or I think it was a Dalvin Cook fumble in like the red zone, irrelevant to discussion here. But the 2022 team, like you're saying and what you're alluding to, it just felt like such a complete team that were winning in different ways. And I don't mean that in a sense where it's like it's ugly, but they could win ugly. They could also win all these boat races, or not boat races, I should say, these F1 races, like the shootouts with the Chiefs. Other teams like blowing out a hurt, but also a properly good Bills team in the playoffs and really dominating that game. But just running the ball, passing the ball, defensive game plans changing. And that's been really fun to watch with Lou Anarumo, which we'll talk about. But like you're just saying too, it's just they have star power in the offense. They have a more complete team than maybe they've had the last 2 years, especially how they feel up front. And we'll talk about that. But just the defense just can take over games as well. Really, really fun team. When you talk about the Chiefs, you go, what are you going to talk about? Mahomes, Andy Reid, Travis Kelce. Talk about the Bills. It's like, okay, Josh Allen, okay, a nice defense, but it's incomplete offense, but they're good, but Bengals just feel complete. And that, I think it continues into this year.
It's why let's transition here to the biggest question we have about their offense. And it's why I think this discussion is much different than it was last year, because coming into last season, it was, how are they going to be more consistent? How are they going to respond to what we all knew was coming? Teams were going to play more too high coverages against them. They were going to dare them to beat them in ways that wasn't just taking shots down the field. And that's exactly what happened. They saw more cover 2 than any other team in the NFL last year. And for the first month of the season, they struggled. Joe Burrow was taking a ton of sacks. They couldn't run the ball even into advantageous looks. They were just totally out of sorts offensively. And maybe part of that was Burrow with the appendectomy in the preseason, but they had a new offensive line that they were getting accustomed to. They had all these new pieces, limited practice time in camp, and they just didn't feel like they had found their footing. And then in week 5, we've talked about this a million times, they transition to an almost completely shotgun-based offense, and they start running the ball out of the gun. So this siloed concern that we had when they were always under center, when they would run, they'd always throw out of the shotgun, that gets erased. And they turn into one of the most efficient running teams in the league. So now this big looming question that we had about them coming into last season, that's gone. The big, huge shifts that we've seen, the big questions that will be posed to them by defenses, there really aren't that many anymore because they've seen the big swings. We can get into some of the minutia about what certain defenses may do to them and whether that exposes some of the like little tiny hidden weaknesses. But in terms of larger, big macro challenges, this team has solved those for the most part. So I don't really know where the big question about the Bengals offense lies.
I'm glad you kind of did go like, hey, what's your question on it? Because I didn't really have one either. It was more just like, I want to see what maybe the next step is. That just, okay, you guys did this in midstream. And I think that's why we can't get over this change that they did last season. It wasn't a bye week. It wasn't a Thursday night game where they had a half bye. It was just week 5 night game, middle, like they just changed the game plan and then they stuck with that afterwards. And it worked. It sounds so simple, but it's really cool to see a team acknowledge that. And I think that's why we've really come to really respect this Bengals coaching staff on both sides of the ball, is these types of changes that they made. And they did it. Remember, it was middle of the season. We talked about the Bengals team like really coming along, and they were like, oh, was could they make the playoffs? Could they win the division? And we went over their schedule, and it was just a murderer's row. It was
a
like
disaster. And then it didn't matter.
Playoff.
That's how
It
good they
didn't
were.
matter,
It
and they
didn't
just
end
kept
up
winning.
mattering.
They had the third hardest schedule on offense by DVOA last year, and they made these changes and did really well with these changes. So like, I don't know if it's the question, but the things maybe I want to see this year, because I do think the offensive line, which has been a question mark, they actually have a little bit of depth, which is kind of crazy.
It's the best the group has ever been.
Easily.
It is easily the best the offensive line has ever been. They signed Orlando Brown to that big contract in free agency, and he fits what they do. It's actually a really interesting fit, because when they made the move, some people initially reacted and said, "Oh man, this drop back team, you're going to rely on him to play in all these drop back situations."
The new Bengals, though.
Well, think about the new Bengals are the new Chiefs.
Yeah,
you have all this gun gap scheme runs, and he fits that extremely well. He actually slides right into their new identity fairly seamlessly. And that moves Jonah Williams over to right tackle. He wasn't happy when the move was made, understandably, but he's now their new starting right tackle. And then when Lyle Collins gets back from injury, he's now your swing tackle.
Yes.
And so now you have all of these different options. And there's a world,
and he has experience playing guard, like from way back in the day.
They have so much more depth. Jackson Carman, who was fighting to be their starting left guard last year, he's still on the roster. They can endure injuries at all of these spots in a way they couldn't before. And that's there are plenty of ways that they feel like this, but this is one of the ways where they feel like a title team,
right?
Where you have all of these different ways to protect yourself, no matter what the eventualities are. In a typical year with different aspirations, I would look at this roster and think, could they move Lyle Collins? Could a team that needs tackle depth or needs some sort of option in a pinch at right tackle, would they make a call about Lyle Collins? Not now.
No.
This is a championship team. They want to win the Super Bowl. So all of the depth that they have, they're going to hang on to all of the depth that they have.
You're buyers. You're not sellers right now. You are definitely buyers.
It's not worth it. Whatever pick you're going to get, whatever late round pick swap you're going to get, and the $7 million you'll save against the cap, it does not matter because of where you eventually want to go.
You would even if it's one win that it gets you. It just the AFC is going to be a bloodbath. We'll talk about just this division, but also what's the other division that would be mentioned might be the class of the class, the AFC East. So that's just already who you're battling for wild card spots as well. But what you're talking about with the run game, that's so important, because that was another thing too, was the types of runs they were doing, not only out of the shotgun, they were a heavy zone team before, inside zone, outside zone. And then we've talked about this, they changed the types of runs they went to. And like you're saying with Orlando Brown, the duo runs, which is a very physical at you type of run. Also him pulling, like you mentioned, the gap scheme stuff. These are all the runs that the Bengals, even the Bills, I've watched in this preseason and last year, even the Chiefs, they're adding to these spread run looks. So there's a lot more pullers. There's a lot, the variety that of the run game is really increasing throughout the league. And so the skill sets are changing, which is really cool. But I also thought the other thing that they added last year in this kind of movement to the gun, or really full commitment to the gun, was they increased RPOs just a little bit. I remember the Saints game was one. And I'm not saying build a whole house out of it, but
they will run more of them this year.
You can already see in 2021, they were bottom 5 in RPO dropbacks. Last year, they were top 10. I want to say they were 8th. So I think maybe just even bump just a little bit more bump, maybe to that top 5 level. I think that's a great way to handle guys if you're going to be so spread, just like college teams. It's how to handle guys and control defenders without blocking on changing up the looks that you give them. So if we're talking about the next step, that might be one little tweak that I think they can maybe add.
I absolutely think you'll see more of that, because what is one place, one offense that actually shares a lot of similarities with the Bengals, even though it might not at first glance? It might not be the first team you think of.
Well, 99, I was going to say, that's the Bengals and the Rams. That's where Zach Taylor came from, but it's not like the Rams much at all anymore.
It's the Eagles.
Yeah, the spread run, no motion.
11 personnel.
Yeah.
You're laying in the gun. So even if the quarterback isn't as central to the run game as it is in Philadelphia, I think a lot of the ideas are transferable. Not a lot of motion. You have 11 personnel. You're static. And so all the RPOs that the Eagles run, those are applicable to the way the Bengals want to play. And I think it becomes an extension of their run game. So I think you're just going to see a larger package in that shotgun run approach from the Bengals this year.
And this was the LSU money play from their when they won that national championship with Joe Burrow and Chase and Justin Jefferson. Was they ran gun duo, and they had Jamar Chase running glance routes, the little 10 yards and in. and they just ran it over and over. They put the safety in a bind, and those safeties, that type of defense, the quarters heavy defenses. Well, guess what the NFL is running a lot of right now.
Yep.
So you might, they've done it before. It's not like going to be new, but maybe just a little increase. If they're going to run duo a bunch, this is a way to control that safety that kind of fits up on the run.
Yeah, their offensive line coach is an old school guy. So I think it's been a process of getting to this place. And now that they're in this place, I think they can adopt some of these ideas. And maybe
that is hilarious. Yeah. Those are the ones that usually you have to commit, like, hey, we're not going to block this guy. We're not going to block this guy. It's like, well, we're going to beat him with the throw. We're telling an O-line coach you're going to beat him with the throw. Is like, ears off.
I think, again, it's just kind of the next step in the evolution of where we've seen them going. And then one of the other elements that I think is worth looking at is at the end of last season, there were the Chiefs game specifically, the double looks that Jamar Chase and T. Higgins were getting. They were doubling both guys. And so I think one of the things they've tried to talk about and think about this offseason is where can we figure out ideas for how to beat those sorts of double teams? Yeah. So looking at old Devontae Adams stuff with the Packers and like, all right, if we know he's getting doubled on every single play, how do we make sure we can still get him the ball? And I feel comfortable saying this. Joe Burrow went to the white party that Michael Rubin was at. Michael Rubin's white party of the 4th of July one, and Devontae was there, and he was asking Devontae Adams about some of these ways that they've beaten double teams in the past. So those
put you in the slot.
So that's one of the other places that they were looking for some ideas this offseason.
They already had one that beat them, that little digging up move that was awesome in the championship game. That's a classic one, but it's like you need a little more. You need more than just the one money move that you can run there.
But that's the type of stuff we're talking about here. Yeah, it's really just tweaking a couple dials. There are not going to be any big wholesale changes. The personnel is as good as it's ever been in important spots. Jamar Chase is a superstar. T. Higgins is the best number 2 receiver in the league, arguably. Him and Devontae Smith probably right there as 1-2. Joe Burrow is a fully fledged superstar at this point. Yeah. If he's not the second best quarterback in the league, he's the third, and it doesn't really matter where in that hierarchy. He's one of the dudes. He has a seat at the table like we talk about. Yep. I think personnel-wise, really the only thing to think about is the secondary pass catchers and what role they're going to play within the offense, because they lose Samaje Perine in free agency. Right. That may not seem like the biggest loss. He was phenomenal for them down the stretch.
That was literally my note. It doesn't seem like the biggest loss, but it actually kind of is.
He was so good for them in pass protection. Yep. He was such a reliable outlet for them in the passing game, and they didn't really have someone to come in and take that role. Joe Mixon is not somebody they trust in those situations. That's why Perine got that job. And Chris Evans, who they drafted in the middle rounds, I think last season, it sounds like he's going to get the first crack at being that third down back, but that's just, they don't really have anyone else on the roster. Like that's not a position where they spent a lot this offseason. Mixon took a pay cut, and eventually you have to skimp on certain spots, and that and tight end are the 2 spots. So now Irv Smith becomes the tight end of the year, essentially, that they cycle in and out. It was Hayden Hurst last year. So big question, can this offense keep rolling as they cycle through those players in the role spots, essentially? Yeah. And I think that's a big question as other things stay stable.
And we talk about the run game against the 2 high looks, but it's also the checkdowns that Burrow became much more willing to take. He increased his running back target rate by 5% last year, and it was just a lot of those
12th in air yards per target from the start of 2021 until week 4 last year to 27th.
Yeah. And it was
from week on last year. And it was usually a good thing. It was a very good thing.
Oh no, it's like, no, that was a good thing. Cause he learned, it's like, I'd much rather have my 3rd and 4s than face a lot of 3rd and 9s and 3rd and 10s and 3rd and 11s. Cause then he checks it down. It's a first down. And also Perine is one of, if not the best pass protection back in the NFL, top 4 or 5 at the very least. So that's where because Mixon has just been so inconsistent with his eyes, like you're talking about, where they don't trust him fully. And that's where his blemishes have been as a NFL pro. It's just that he has good hands. He can run decent routes. It's just that pass protection, and you can't always just go empty, and you can't always just go 5-man protection every single time. These guys need to block, or need to at least be okay, so defenses don't gauge it and don't go, hey, we're going to test. That's our fish. Let's just start testing him, because that just blows up the entire offense. So it sounds minor, but it really is a big deal. And that's something just to keep track of the first couple of weeks, really.
And the last consideration with the running backs, I tweeted this out yesterday. It's a hilarious stat. From week 5 through 18 last season, the Bengals were 7th in success rate on running back runs, 7th in the NFL. Over the course of last season, the Bengals finished dead last in running back carries of 10 plus yards. They had 22 of them on the year. The league average was 39. So they had the 7th most efficient rushing offense, and they were half of the league average in 10-plus yard runs.
The Ichiro Suzuki of the run game. Just a bunch of singles. No power.
And it brings you back to the Mixon conversation, in that if they had somebody that could get the meat that was on the bone with some of these runs, I think that guy would be cutting into the carries, but they just haven't found that guy yet.
Nope.
They drafted Chase Brown in the 5th round, kind of a traits-based guy. Over the course of the season, does he maybe become that doubles hitter in this offense that they kind of need? But right now, I think that's still one of the few remaining questions about this group, because there aren't many.
No. That's a good thing, Bengals fans. It's actually pretty good. This is biggest question about the Bengals defense for you. It's just what happens with the back end, the safeties, and how they come along. How does Dax Hill look, who was their 1st round pick from last year? Losing Jesse Bates and really just how much they put on that safety group is really, it can be sounding minor, but really it's a big deal in this.
That's where we are with this team. When you want to get where they want to go, this is the type of stuff that you got to talk about.
It really, exactly. It's not talking about, where they can get a sack, what quarterback is playing there. It's like, no, they're talking about depth pieces. But if you want to be a championship roster, these are the type of things you need. Just look at what happened with the Chiefs last year and even the Eagles, how much depth they had at some of these spots. So, and I just think that that's why I need to see. I think they have more young emerging players than maybe I've even given them credit for, which I'll talk about in a second. But I love their front 7, but really just corners have some interesting pieces, but it's really just those safety spots and just how they run this defense that matters more than maybe in other defenses.
Similar to the offensive line, the depth at some of these spots on this defense is better than it's ever been. They feel better about the corner situation than they've ever felt since Anarumo got here. Justifiably so. Cam Taylor-Britt, who was a 2nd round pick for them last year, came in and played well. They drafted DJ Turner in the 2nd round this year. He doesn't have to play because they have 2 established starters. Chidobe Awuzie was hurt for most of last season. He's back now on the other side. Bringing in Miles Murphy as a 1st round pick and then having Joseph Osai there. Now they have 4 edge guys. They've never had this sort of depth on the edge. In 2021, it was the 2 guys because Osai was hurt. I mean, so now they have 4 potential guys they can roll out at those spots. So really what you're left, and the 2 linebackers are back. They re-signed Jermaine Pratt in free agency. Logan Wilson signed an extension, both very good players for them. Safety is it. I will say this. I left them off of my top 10 defenses list. I did that before I went to Cincinnati.
Ooh.
After going there, I feel better about what's going to happen with them on defense, because one of the questions that we had is that how can you mix new pieces on the back end with this defense where everyone knows everything and their flexibility is really their biggest strength? Can you have somebody that's new to this come along at the same pace? And I think the answer is yes, because from what I understand, they haven't had a choice. They're just operating as they would have operated otherwise, and Nick Scott has to figure it out. So I heard during practice, they had a check. And it was some sort of blitz check that they were checking out of based on a formational tell within the offense. And it was a 1-word check. And they just called the check, and he doesn't know the word. So he just has to figure it out on the fly. And that's what they've been doing all camp. So everyone else has been operating how they would typically operate, and he's had to figure it out. The nice part about that is he is very smart.
Right. And he has reps at this. So that does matter.
I had a conversation with him in the locker room. Bengals are great. The open locker room during training camp. It's just a really good time to kind of get some context about certain things. When he came in for his free agent visit, he and Anarumo had an hour-long conversation in Anarumo's office, and he was getting him on the board with certain stuff. And, if we gave you this, how would you handle this? Sometimes you sign free agent sight unseen, but that's not what this was. They wanted to make sure they were getting somebody in this spot that they knew could come along at the right pace mentally to fit within everything else that they were doing on defense, because they knew they were going to lose Jesse Bates in free agency. They didn't know that they were going to lose Von Bell too. So Nick Scott was kind of the solution here. And I trust their ability to kind of make this thing work with Anarumo, with the rest of the defense. What this group reminds me of, in talking to some people there when I was there, it reminds me of the Vikings in like 2017.
Okay. I thought you were going to say last year. I was like, wait, well, hold on a minute.
Okay. So like 2017 Vikings. If you go back and you look at that team, by that point, everyone on that defense was in year 3, 4, 5 of playing with Zimmer, and they were playing together, and they like shared a brain. Yeah. It was like watching a hive mind.
Those third down defenses, man.
And what that allows you to do is it gives you such flexibility because you're operating on one word checks that you can do as an entire group because of everything that you've seen together. The players are suggesting blitzes that they run. Like they are just on a different level because of all the time they've spent together. And I think they trust that Nick Scott is the sort of person that can come along with them for the ride. And that is really the question I had about this defense. With that being answered in a way that I find satisfactory, to me, it's all systems go.
Yeah. And that's what you got to note, like you said, is that they hit the ground running. That's really just one new face on that defense. It's not even if
Maxwell didn't really play last year, but at least he was around.
That's what I mean. He's really the only one guy learning this defense. It's not like the old microwave what we talked about we Bengalify the defense before, where there are 5, 6, 7 new guys learning what they're doing. So that does matter a lot. And even I think in that discussion, it felt bad keeping the Bengals off. I still always thought they're going to be good. It's just, are they going to be that lead level? But yeah, exactly. And
they finished last year.
But right. But they're one of the best game planning teams. And Lou Anarumo and that defensive coaching staff is fantastic at game planning. So it's like, that's what, I don't know if they hit that high end, but I do feel great about them. Like, it's never like, I'm like, oh no, they're going to be bad. Watch out for this. It's like, I still think they're going to be good. And I just think of the front seven that you talked about, like Trey Hendrickson still, he got repaid or got the extension as well, but he's like one of the best pass rushers, period. And just like you said, mentioning the Miles Murphy draft pick and the guy that I'll talk about instead, Joseph Asai, just getting that depth so he can stay fresh. Sometimes doesn't have to play those first and second down snaps. That's just going to pay dividends as the season goes along, which is always, that's why depth helps so much, is that when a guy gets banged up and we got to watch his reps or do any of those other things that like, hey, we got to rotate these guys, get these guys reps. That helps. It just helps. And so that's where you feel pretty good. And then you talk about Mike Hilton, even in the slot, like he's fantastic. They just have so many plus players. So I get it. I get it where you see them and especially see them in practice. I'm sure it's really impressive in person because probably watching them practice, watching smart units is going to the 49ers practice last year was one of the coolest things. Just watching that defense fly around and yell and communicate on the fly, or not even communicate because like you said, they're in the same hive mind. I'm sure that defense feels the same way. So I don't feel bad. I feel good. I'm just wondering what the top end is.
Again, after having those conversations when I was there, and the thought was essentially, well, all 10 other guys are on this page. This one guy, he needs to get with them. We're not going the other direction. And I think that's been the mindset all year. And I think that Nick Scott, more than anyone else, has understood that because he looks at that group and says, of course, I should be able to get on that level rather than have everyone else slow down so I can catch up. And it feels like that has been the approach and the mindset. And even beyond Nick Scott and Dax Hill at safety, Jordan Battle, who they drafted in the third round, I think he was in the mix to be a starter at one point this offseason because of how much he had shown them and how much football he saw as part of that Alabama defense and that Nick Saban world.
Right.
So even at safety, they've probably got a little bit more depth than they have in years past.
Even a guy like Dax Hill, who I liked, but I liked him almost better as a slot player. So, but like I just mentioned, Mike Hilton gets banged up every year. So now you have depth there. So it's like, again,
who they drafted in the 7th round, they've liked him in camp as well. They've got a lot of different guys, a lot of different options. It's a really good roster.
Yeah.
X factor for the very promising 2023 Cincinnati Bengals. Who do you got?
I want to say Joe Burrow's calf, but I'm going to say
it's worth mentioning.
It is. Calf injuries kind of come and go. Or I shouldn't say come and go. They linger and they're annoying, but I'm going to say Lou Anarumo and the defensive coaching staff. I just the exact discussion we had about the defense carries over to this. I want to see the tweaks, any changes that they make, and just how they get these two new starters at the back end along. I think they're going to do it well, but I just want to see it.
For me, it's the secondary pass catchers. Those guys were more important to their success last year on offense than it might have seemed at first glance. They had two guys in Pirine and Hurst that filled their roles very well within this group. Mm-hmm. Can their replacements, as they continue to cycle through, give them those same sort of options within this offense? Because there aren't that many big questions for me other than that. Like, health is important, the quarterback's health, and whether that's going to linger, but they've kept him out this long for a reason. He doesn't need much work. He has a very good sense. He hasn't had an off season the last two off seasons.
Right. I was just going to say.
So there aren't many things where I feel like they're pivot points for this team because they're so strong. But I think that's the one that I would pick on offense other than the safeties. Yeah. Breakout candidate for the Cincinnati Bengals. Who do you got?
Man, they do have some fun young defensive pieces that maybe I've underrated. Logan Wilson being one, like he got paid, so kind of now he gets the attention now. And Cam Taylor-Britt was another one. But I'm going to go with Joseph Asai, who is a third-year player, but it's only second year playing. Like you mentioned, he was on IR that first year. Really came to my attention when he had that huge sack against the Chiefs with the 3-down rush on the last play to kind of keep them out of knock them out of field goal range or make it the field goal longer. Last year, he only played 32% of the snaps, and that's going to get an uptick. The last 5 of the last 6 games, including the playoffs, he played over half the snaps. So they were bringing him along, and then they started trusting him big time in the second half of the year, the back end of the year. He had over 10% pressure rate, which is a huge threshold to hit, and had a higher pressure rate than Alex Highsmith, TJ Watt, Shaq Barrett. So he's already tangibly doing stuff right now. And he's only 23 this year. So he's in his 3rd season. He's only 23 years old. So I think he's going to break out. I think they're going to rotate him more and more and more, get him over that 50% threshold for snap count. And I think he's going to really impact the game even more than he did last year.
Bump one of those guys inside on passing downs.
Yeah.
Miles Murphy's a big body guy. They're just going to have so many different looks in those pass rush, defined passing situations, pass rush situations. And Joseph Ossai, I hope that he has a good season because I would love for him to be known for more than that hit on Mahomes at the end of that game.
That's why I didn't mention it.
Good player, and he was an ascending player, and I just hope that we can kind of transcend that because he deserves it. He's that sort of player, and I think he will be. Mine's Dax Hill. There aren't that many guys to choose from on this team. Like a lot of guys are established. There hasn't been a ton of turnover, but I'm going to go with Dax Hill. First year in this defense, really impressive athlete, and now gets his first crack to be one of those guys on the back end. But again, there aren't that many players that already haven't broken out on this group. All right, what is success for the 2023 Bengals?
Super Bowl. I think making the game. It's got to be. I think
to me, it's winning it.
Winning it. Well, yeah.
To me, it's winning. To me, it's winning the Super Bowl. Like that is this sort
That's
of.
That's where they're at. That's where they're at.
They know it too.
Yeah,
and not in like a cocky way, but like when you build to a certain moment as a coach, as a team builder, when you're on one of these staffs, and these guys have been around the league for a long time. Zach Taylor was on the Rams staff when they went to the Super Bowl. And Brian Callahan, their offensive coordinator, was with the Broncos when Peyton Manning was there. When you're around the game for long enough, you get a sense of which teams can do it and which teams can't. And this team can. And you only get so many of those in your career when you walk into it and you just know. And Joe Burrow hasn't gotten paid yet. They're going to have to start skimping in certain areas because that's just how it works. They're not there yet. I mean, there is a chance that this is the most complete this Bengals team ever is under this regime. And so knowing that going in, the goal has to be, this is when we want to win it.
Absolutely. It's when Mahomes, they asked him like, who do you want to beat? I think it was going to the AFC Championship game. And he was like, oh, the Bengals. And it's like, I think that just like speaks to the rivalry. The Chiefs have been so damn good the last few years, and the Bengals have been, it's 50-50. Like, so it's like, we might get a rubber match this year. So I'm really excited to see that kind of rivalry continue because this is an elite team.